As the international break comes to an end, we're entering that moment in the season in which challengers differentiate themselves from champions and good teams set themselves apart from legendary teams. And it's no different in the Premier League as we enter a three-horse race for the first time in over 10 years, as Arsenal, Liverpool and Manchester City are all striving for the Premier League trophy with varying motivations. Pep Guardiola is striving for an unforeseen four-peat. Jurgen Klopp is looking for a fairytale finish as he leaves Liverpool at the end of the season, while Mikel Arteta's young, vibrant Gunner side are looking to win Arsenal's first ever Premier League title in over 20 years. And the question that's on everybody's mind going into these pivotal 10 games is who's going to win the Premier League. And in today's video, I'm going to discuss who I think is going to ultimately win the Premier League. And that's going to come based off of the fixture list, based off of fixture congestion, and mainly down to who I think are going to be the difference makers coming into these huge clashes that are going to define the Premier League season as we know it. Let's begin with Arsenal. Now, Arsenal, we all know it, were in a very similar position as they were last season as they are now. Top of the league going into the Easter period of the season. And 1 year on, with the arrival of Declan Rice and priceless experience gained from the capitulation that we saw from Arsenal towards the end of last season, I genuinely believe that this Arsenal team is not the same team that we saw just over a year ago. They're definitely the best defensive team in all of Europe, having the best defensive record in Europe as well as in England. They're so assured in the way that they play, and in recent times, despite early struggles at the early part of the season in front of goal, they're now scoring goals at will, scoring 33 goals in 8 games since the changing of year from 2023 to 2024, averaging over 4 goals a game in their last 8 Premier League games. They're creating chances upon chances upon chances, which included a huge win against leaders at the time, Liverpool, in which Arsenal were thoroughly the better team on the night, even though I do believe that Liverpool were quite poor and below their level in that game. I do think that that was mainly down to the way Arsenal played, the way they set up, and the way that they pressured Liverpool into making mistakes. You look at the goals that Alisson and Van Dijk were responsible for, the first and third goals. That was definitely because Arsenal were applying pressure on Liverpool. But you look at the way that Arsenal set up a typical 4-3-3 that turns into a 3-5-2 as they attack, or a 3-1-4-2 or 3-1-4-3, 3-1-3-3. Arsenal have a lot of game changers. You look at Martin Odegaard, who there's been a lot of murmurs about whether he can be that captain, that leading figure for Arsenal. But this season, he's really proven that. Now, he may not have the same numbers that he had last season. This season, he has 16 goals and assists in all competitions. But you look at just the game he had against Porto just before the international break ended. He was carrying that Arsenal team. He was the main guy in that team. He was putting in a real captain's performance in a game that his team needed him. You look at Bukayo Saka, who at the start of the season, people were saying he had the numbers, but where were the performances? I mean, if this is a bad season for Bukayo Saka, then nearly 30 goals and assists in all competitions is not bad going for a person who's quote-unquote not performing at their highest level. And then you look at people like Declan Rice, who's come in for 100 million. And I will be very frank, I didn't believe him coming to Arsenal for that amount. I didn't think that was essentially what they needed. I did think they needed a player similar to Declan Rice, but I thought that 100 million was way above his actual value. But you look at the level that he's been playing at and the performances he's been dropping for Arsenal, he's been incredible. And now this narrative that Arsenal's made him a better player and Arsenal is bringing out the best Declan Rice. Declan Rice was always this good at West Ham. Anybody who'd been watching West Ham consistently knew the level and the ability that this guy had. But at Arsenal, when you play for a better team, when you're surrounded by better players, which he has been next to Jorginho in that midfield, he just looks completely formidable in every game that he plays, always sweeping up the ball. And I think he's going to be very, very important in Arsenal winning the Premier League if they are going to go about and do that, especially in the Champions League, because scoring goals has never been an issue for Arsenal. It's always been how good have they been defensively. And Mikel Arteta has taken that to the next level this year, fortifying that defense and making them watertight at the back. You look at the way that Mikel Arteta has got this team feeling and the way that the fans come to the ground, they come to the Emirates. It seems like every other game, the Emirates is producing an atmosphere better than the last game. And I genuinely believe that Mikel Arteta has changed the mentality in this team and changed the mentality of Arsenal as a whole. For many years, Arsenal were seen as the banter club, but I think Mikel Arteta has come in and now Arsenal are a serious team, not just in England, but in Europe. And you look at the games against Bayern Munich, that's going to be a real test for Mikel Arteta's side. And I think that you look at the way they played against Porto in the previous round to qualify for the quarterfinals, that's definitely something they're going to need to talk about, which I talked about in a previous video. The way Porto set up against them, the way teams like Brentford have set up against them, both home and away. They do struggle a bit against teams that set up in a mid-block, teams that are able to defend resolutely in the middle of the field without dropping so deep that they give Arsenal a lot of time and, comfort on the ball, but also applying a bit of pressure that makes Arsenal move the ball quicker and doesn't allow Arsenal to dilly-dally on the ball. So I believe that if Mikel Arteta wants to get to that next level, you look at the way teams like Man City play against top teams, they employ a mid-block. Now, they may not be as defensively resolute as a Porto or an Inter Milan or an Atletico Madrid, but you're going to need to break down a team just like that. And I feel like you look at the games coming up with the Champions League and the games against Bayern Munich and the games in the Premier League. Luckily for Arsenal, they've been knocked out of the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup. So all their concentration is going to be on the Premier League and the Champions League. But this is going to be big for Mikel Arteta. Can he rotate? Can he keep players at their highest level? Which I think he's been doing. This season, it doesn't look like their players are, plateauing or burning out too early. People like Bukayo Saka, who have looked completely burnt out for many years before this one, actually looks like he's hitting his peak at the right point. But the main question that everybody will be asking is whether Arsenal are going to capitulate again. But I don't think they're going to capitulate. I'm not sure whether this team has the fortitude to win the Premier League. You look at the fixtures they have coming up. The teams that they're playing have a 9.2 average position in the league, which means that they're playing teams in and around that mid-table Europa Conference League position. You look at their fixtures against Chelsea, Man City. But I think the biggest games that are going to be coming up for them are those two games against Tottenham and Man United away. Everybody's been talking about how important Tottenham's role in this title run-in is going to be. But I genuinely believe that Manchester United are probably going to have a bigger say in this Premier League title race than Tottenham are. Those two games are going to be coming in a time in the season where Arsenal might, if they do progress against Bayern Munich, be playing Champions League semi-finals. Their attention may be skewed. Say the Premier League title is out of their hands at that point. But those are going to be two big games for them. You also look at the game at home against Chelsea. That's going to be another big game. The Aston Villa game is going to be huge. Arsenal have all the resources that they need to win the Premier League this season. But the main thing that's going to come down to is whether those players that I talked about, the game changers, can actually consistently perform, and whether Mikel Arteta, in the games where his team may not be the favorites, can tactically set up his team to be the best team on the night. Now on to second place Liverpool and Jurgen Klopp's Reds. This is Jurgen Klopp's last ever chance at winning the Premier League title. Now obviously we all know he won it in 2020, but it came with that asterisk of winning it in COVID, not discrediting winning the Premier League. But the fact that there was one during COVID meant that there wasn't that buzz, there wasn't that thrill and, feeling of celebrating with the fans, which is ultimately what it's all about. And I think that that's what Jurgen Klopp and this Liverpool team want to right this season. They want to change that, and they want to celebrate that trophy in front of all the fans who missed out in the 2020 season. The difference makers for Liverpool are going to be, as always, Mohamed Salah. Over 30 goals and assists this season, as he always does almost every single year since he's come to the club. I think his role in this Premier League title run-in is going to be as crucial as it has always been in any year that Liverpool have been gunning for the Premier League trophy. Trent Alexander-Arnold, who's unfortunately injured at this moment, we saw how he was deployed in different positions at the start of the season, in midfield, playing, that inverted right back position, coming into the midfield, supporting Liverpool, because we know how fragile their midfield was towards the start of the season. But that midfield has fortified itself mainly down to people like Alexis McAllister, World Cup winner, as we all know, has been so good for Liverpool this season. Their game against Manchester City, Van Dijk got all the plaudits, and he was the one who I think ultimately won man of the match. I might be wrong about that, but I think McAllister was the main reason that Liverpool even got anything out of that game. Obviously, he was the one that scored the penalty, but he ran the show in that game. Him and Endo were incredible for Liverpool. And in a game that they came up against Rodri, Kevin De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva, Phil Foden, these are world-class midfield players, and McAllister looked a cut above the rest. Obviously, Virgil van Dijk, Captain Fantastic, is always going to be another mainstay in this Liverpool team. Is going to be very important, and whether Liverpool can go on and win the title, he's been incredible, imperious throughout the season, and he's going to need to maintain that level for the last few games of the season if Liverpool are going to have any chance of winning the trophy. And an X factor that I believe many people are sleeping on is Darwin Núñez. There's always this narrative that Darwin Núñez is an absolutely atrocious footballer, but he's got over 30 goals and assists this season. Now, granted, It's varying across competitions, but to still get 30 goals and assists is pretty good going for a player who's considered a flop by many. Coming into the last final 10 games, Liverpool probably have the best fixture list out of the 3 teams. Pair that with the fact that they're playing Europa League football, which means that they are able to rest players during the week, unlike City and Arsenal, who are going up against Real Madrid and Bayern Munich. Liverpool have an average of 10.2 position in the league of the remaining fixtures that they have, facing teams like Brighton, Sheffield United, Fulham, Everton, West Ham, Villa, Wolves. I feel like those games that they have coming up are pretty rudimentary for Jurgen Klopp's men. Granted, they do have a lot of injuries right now, which are hampering their top level at this moment in time. We saw that against Manchester United. They were completely shattered towards the end of the game. But you're seeing the players being reintegrated back into the side. Players are coming back from injury. And once all those players are back from injury, it will be so easy for Jurgen Klopp to be able to say, hey, you play in the Europa League for this game, while I rest you for the Premier League game that we got on the weekend. Unlike Manchester City, as I mentioned before. A 10.2 average position for the teams that they're playing that I mentioned is so good for Liverpool. The fixtures that they have are not as tough as Arsenal's or Manchester City. Now, granted, Arsenal and Manchester City are playing against each other, which is going to affect that number by a huge margin, considering both of them are at the very top of the league. But Liverpool also have 5 games at home. The games that they have away are not that tough, even though I will say an away trip to Everton towards the end of the season, while Everton are still in a relegation battle, does not sound like any fun. Even myself, who is not a Liverpool fan, that sounds like a game written for Liverpool to drop points. Obviously, you have the away trip to Manchester United, which Liverpool fans will not be looking forward to after that quarterfinal defeat in the FA Cup. Games against Tottenham at the very end of the season, games against Villa. There are tough games in there for Liverpool, but I think you look at the games they have, you look at the squad that they have, they should be easy going to get through those games. And this Liverpool team throughout the season has shown that even in games that they may not be the better team, even in games that they probably didn't deserve to win the game, they always find a way. And that's something that Jurgen Klopp has distilled through in his team throughout his time at the club. This team is never going to back down. This team is not going to stop until they get that victory, until they get that point, until they get that result. And I think that they've gotten their games against City out of the way. They've gotten their games against Arsenal out of the way. Now it's about winning the games that are in front of them and making sure that they don't drop points against teams that they shouldn't be. If the Europa League becomes a distraction, I don't think any Liverpool fan will be annoyed or in any way, shape, or form frustrated if Jurgen Klopp completely throws the kitchen towel and says, we're not going to compete in this. We're focusing on the Premier League. We're putting all our eggs in the basket of the Premier League, and we're going to go all guns blazing for that. Because frankly, that's what Liverpool want. That is what Liverpool have been waiting for 30 years. And I think that Jurgen Klopp is in a very good position to make it so. He's going to do his very best going into the final 10 games of the season. The fixtures they have aren't that difficult. Their players are hitting a very, very good peak right now. Liverpool are definitely a team to look out for going into these final 10 games. Now we come on to the champions of it all, the reigning champions, the defending champions, Manchester City, which is a strength in itself, considering that Manchester City have been in this scenario so many times. We've seen so many years in which Manchester City have been neck and neck with Liverpool, or, tight with another team, Manchester United or even Chelsea at different points, and they kind of just run away with it. They lock in and they win their games pretty easily, and they create this 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 point gap that you kind of look back at and you think, was there ever even a title race to begin with? And I genuinely believe that Pep Guardiola is going to be the main reason why Manchester City win this Premier League title. Of course, you have the difference makers. You have the incredible players like Phil Foden, who's really, really reached another peak this season. It seems like with Kevin De Bruyne's injury, he's taken the keys, he's taken the mantle, and he's taken the pressure off of everyone else in this team. And he said, this is my team. And he's showing that level that Pep Guardiola has described, and many people across Manchester City fans have described, that he can be one of the best players on the planet. He's been incredible for Manchester City. He's been winning games single-handedly. He's been dictating games both in the Premier League and in the Champions League. Pair this with Erling Haaland, who's still scoring goals easily as we've known him to be doing for the last 5 years. Kevin De Bruyne, who's come back from injury and has not missed a heartbeat as it seems, except for that Liverpool game in which he was pretty subpar. But Bernardo Silva there, you have people like Jeremy Doku, Jack Grealish, who's been unfortunately injured, but we know how important he can be for this Man City team. John Stones is finally back from injury and is looking to pick up fitness. Rodri has always been a mainstay in this team and always turns up in big games. which he's going to need to do with Champions League quarterfinals coming up, a game against Arsenal. People like Ruben Diaz, Nathan Ake. This team is filled with experience. This team is filled with world-class players who know how to do it in the big games. But we all know Manchester City to be this team that goes on and they win games comfortably. They go on in the final 6 weeks of the season and they turn it on. Pep Guardiola invents a new revolutionary tactical philosophy and they win the Premier League by 8 points. But even this season, I watch Manchester City and they're just something seems to be missing. Obviously, it's difficult to motivate a group of players who've won the Premier League 3 times in a row. It's difficult to motivate a group of players who've won the Champions League just last year, something that Man City have been chasing for almost a decade now. But there just doesn't seem to be that zip. There doesn't seem to be that intensity, that motivation, that real drive to win the Premier League like I see with Arsenal or Liverpool. They seem to be kind of coasting, and it's prevalent in their game against big teams that are actually going to give them a bit of a challenge against the other big 6 teams in the Premier League. Manchester City played 8 games and only won 2, and those 2 games were home and away against Man United, who are comfortably. Now, Chelsea are 11th in the league, but I wouldn't even consider Chelsea to be much significantly worse than Manchester United when it comes to team for team. I don't believe that if Manchester United were to play Chelsea, Man United would easily beat Chelsea. And they beat Man United twice, and Man United are not that good. They drew 5 times and lost once. Now, granted, that one loss was against Arsenal in a game that was pretty neck and neck. Arsenal won it marginally by a deflection off Nathan Ake. I think that game was a fair result, would have been a 0-0. But you even look at that game, for example, Pep Guardiola went into it so scared and so, I don't want to say naive, but in a very pragmatic style, sort of as though he was happy with getting a draw away to Arsenal. Now, I know going to the Emirates is a difficult fixture. It's always going to be, now that Arteta has instilled this philosophy and this idea that he has at Arsenal. But Manchester City don't do that. Whether it's at Anfield, whether it's at the Bernabeu, whether it's at the Etihad or it's at the Emirates, Manchester City have always gone into games with the idea of hurting their opponent. And that game really left a bad taste in my mouth. And many other games have done the same. You look at their 2 games against Chelsea, conceding 5 goals to this Chelsea team, home and away, for me is very, very concerning. And I think it's something that Pep Guardiola really needs to fix up. Now, obviously, the first game they drew 4-4, but the second game they drew 1-1, which is definitely an improvement, meaning you didn't concede 4 goals. But even the game they drew 1-1, they created next to no chances. Chelsea could have scored 2, 3, 4 goals if Raheem Sterling and Nicholas Jackson were actually clinical. And Manchester City there's just something missing. I don't know what it is. It seems like they don't have that control in some of these big games. You even look at the Aston Villa game, where Manchester City were limited to 2 shots. Now, I know this was a very long time ago, and Man City has changed a lot since then, but Aston Villa completely dominated Manchester City in that game. Manchester City had nothing in that game. Aston Villa completely choked them, suffocated them for 90 minutes. That's the first time I've watched Pep Guardiola's Man City look so ordinary in very, very, very long time. They looked so ordinary against an Aston Villa team that just over a year ago, they were a mid-table team. You look at their game as well against an injury-riddled Liverpool team at Anfield. Now, I know going to Anfield is never going to be easy, but Liverpool made them look ordinary. Like, if we're being honest here, Liverpool made them look ordinary. They looked so subpar, Manchester City. It was a game that I was really looking forward to, and the quality of football for Man City was not that great. They were good for most parts in the first half, but you look at the second half, they looked so scared. By the time Liverpool even scored 1-1, it looked like Man City were happy to take a point and run away with it. And of course, looking at how tight this Premier League title race is going to be, that might be important. Getting a point away at Anfield might be the definitive point, but I also don't think it's going to be. And I think that they need to change their philosophy a bit. Their remaining fixtures, the teams that they're playing have a 9.6 average position in the league. They have 2 very big games coming up against Arsenal and Aston Villa, which are going to determine a lot. But after those 2 games, you look at the fixtures they have, and it's pretty straightforward for Manchester City. If they are able to get past those 2 games, both against Arsenal and Aston Villa, you pair that with the Champions League games against Real Madrid, Manchester City are probably going to be the favorites. If they beat both Arsenal and Aston Villa, it's probably neck and neck between them and Liverpool going into the run-in. Now, Arsenal are not completely out of it just because Manchester City beat them, but I think that it would be very unlikely for it to fall to anyone outside of Manchester City or Liverpool. Now, predicting the Premier League winner is definitely not something that's straightforward. There are many factors that go into football, which is why we love the sport, right? There's the fixture congestion of both Manchester City and Arsenal, who have Champions League games. And I believe that both of them are very, very much equipped to both progress to the semifinal and ultimately play each other if they were to, which is another, that's a completely other video for another day, which is another thing that we even factor into this title race as a whole. Manchester City's lackluster performances against Big Six sides, Liverpool's more favorable fixtures, Manchester City's experience in this moment, Arsenal's, essentially trying to get vengeance for what happened last year. It's definitely tight. It's gonna be tight. I can easily see the title being split up between first and third by about 5 points. And I think it's gonna come down. I don't think it's gonna come down to that game against Man City and Arsenal. I don't believe that that's gonna be the definitive game. I very much expect both teams to cancel each other out, just as they did last season, and just as they did at the start of this season. Sorry. Even though Arsenal won the game, I think it was a pretty that game had 0-0 written all over it. But I see Arsenal, continuing to do what they're doing. I see Liverpool chugging along. I genuinely believe Liverpool they're gonna be good. I think Liverpool they're probably gonna have the easiest run in terms of the fixtures they have, in terms of the feeling around the team. I don't think they're gonna have that many bumps in the road. Whereas I do think Arsenal and Man City are gonna have some bumps. Now I'm not saying that Liverpool are gonna win all their games, but I think they're gonna have the least amount of bumps. Now you may believe that means I'm saying Liverpool are gonna win the league. It's not definitive. As I'm speaking right here, I'm still going against what I had written initially. Because initially I wrote that Liverpool will win the league. Because I looked at the fixtures they had, I look at the players they have, I look at the feeling around it. And that game between Arsenal and Man City, if that game does end in a draw, Liverpool are in pole position to run away with it. I believe that Manchester City and Arsenal have tougher games that they're probably going to drop points in. But it's hard to bet against Man City. It's hard to bet against Man City. It is very hard to bet against Man City because if Arsenal were to go to Man City and were to lose, I don't see Arsenal winning that game. Now, frankly, I don't see Arsenal going to the Etihad and winning at all. I think the only possible outcomes to come from that game are Manchester City winning and Arsenal drawing, or Man City and Arsenal drawing. I don't see Arsenal going there and getting a victory, which I think is the only way that Arsenal can be the favorites after that game. I don't think if Arsenal draw or lose, they can ever be the favorites. Even if they draw and Liverpool win their game in hand, they go above Arsenal. And I think if Liverpool ever go above Arsenal at any point going into the last 10 games, Liverpool are going to finish above Arsenal. Whether that means they win the league or not, I don't know. But they're going to finish above Arsenal. Now, who I think is going to win the league? I think if I had to give you an answer right here and there, I think I would have to tell you I think it's going to be Liverpool. I genuinely believe it's going to be Liverpool. I think Arsenal might finish second. I don't see it. Now Pep Guardiola might prove me differently. He might prove me wrong. But I'm looking at the fixtures. I'm looking at the way the teams have played so far. Obviously, the international break is going to be a huge determinant. You might have injuries. You might have people coming back into form. But I look at the way Man City's played all year. I look at the way Liverpool's played. I look at the way Arsenal's played. I look at the games they have left. I look at the difference makers in these teams. Is Phil Foden enough to carry you to a Premier League title? I don't think so. Now, obviously, Arsenal and Man City are interchangeable. Man City could finish second. Arsenal could finish second. It depends who wins that game between the two of them. It really depends on who wins that game at the Etihad. That's a big game. But I also think that Man United game is big too. That Man United game between Man United and Liverpool, Man United and Arsenal is going to define a lot. I don't think the Tottenham games are going to be that important. I think Tottenham are probably going to lose all those games. People are hyping it up as though Tottenham are going to be so pivotal. I genuinely believe Tottenham are going to lose all those games. Maybe they might get a point against Arsenal. But I look at Arsenal's games. Arsenal have tough games, man. They have tough games. Yeah, I'm going to say I think Liverpool's going to win the league. I think Man City's going to come second. I think Arsenal is going to finish third. That's what I'm going to go with. I think Jurgen Klopp is going to get his fairy tale finish. Arsenal are going to fall just at the end once again. And I think Man City, I think their dominance is going to come to an end. But obviously, as Jurgen Klopp leaves the league, Pep Guardiola is going to have the Premier League as his playground once again.